my brother stood at the altar of the Grand Meridian Hotel, microphone in hand, and announced to 300 guests that I had filed for bankruptcy. He said it with a smile, like he was sharing good news. Like my financial collapse was the perfect wedding toast. The room erupted in awkward laughter, and I sat there in my rented suit, hands folded on the white tablecloth, watching him grin. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had signed the purchase agreement for that very hotel 6 weeks earlier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Every chandelier above their heads, every marble tile beneath their feet, every single glass of champagne they were drinking belonged to me. But I didn't stand up. Not yet. I just smiled back and let him keep talking. My name is Marcus Reid, and for the last 8 years, my family has treated me like a cautionary tale. The brother who couldn't get it together. The one who bounced from job to job, always scrambling, always behind. They weren't entirely wrong, at least not in the beginning. I had tried a dozen different ventures in my 20s, and most of them failed. A food truck that broke down more than it ran. A dropshipping business that got buried in chargebacks. A consulting gig that never landed a second client. Each failure became a punchline at family dinners, a reason for my older brother Derek to lean back in his chair and offer unsolicited advice about responsibility and planning ahead. Derek was the golden child. MBA from Wharton, senior vice president at a wealth management firm, married to Vanessa, who came from old money and never let anyone forget it. They lived in a penthouse downtown, drove matching German sedans, and had a vacation home in Aspen they visited twice a year. Derek was everything my parents had hoped for, and I was everything they worried about. That dynamic had been set in stone since we were kids, and nothing I did seemed capable of changing it. The thing is, I had changed. I just hadn't told them. 3 years ago, I stumbled into something that actually worked. I had been doing freelance property management for a friend who owned a couple of rental units in the suburbs. It was grunt work, dealing with tenant complaints, coordinating repairs, collecting rent. But I noticed something. The buildings were old, outdated, sitting in neighborhoods that were just starting to turn around. Young professionals were moving in, coffee shops were opening up, bike lanes were being added. The area was on the edge of something, and nobody was paying attention. I started researching. I spent nights in the library, pulling up zoning maps, reading city council meeting notes, tracking development permits. I learned that a major tech company was planning to build a regional headquarters about 2 miles from where those rental units sat. The announcement hadn't been made public yet, but the permits were there if you knew where to look. I knew what was coming. Property values were about to explode. I didn't have money, not the kind you need to buy real estate. But I had time, and I had an idea. I started reaching out to older property owners in the area, the ones who had held onto their buildings for decades and were tired of dealing with tenants. I offered to take the properties off their hands with seller financing. No bank, no traditional mortgage, just a deal between us. They kept a lien on the property, I made monthly payments directly to them, and I took over management. Most of them said no. A few said maybe. 2 said yes. That was the beginning. I took those 2 buildings, dumped every dollar I had into basic renovations, and started renting them out at rates just below market. They filled up fast. The cash flow was thin, but it was there. I used the income from those first 2 properties to approach more sellers, refine my pitch, and got better at finding owners who were motivated. Within 18 months, I had 7 buildings. Small ones, nothing fancy, but they were mine. Technically, they were still tied up in seller-financed agreements, but I controlled them, and I was building equity with every payment. Then the tech company made their announcement. Property values in the area doubled within 6 months. I refinanced everything I could, pulled out equity, and started moving faster. I bought 2 more buildings with traditional financing, flipped one for a quick profit, and used that money to secure a small commercial property near the new headquarters. That one I turned into co-working space, which filled up before I even finished the build-out. The cash flow from that single property was more than I had made in the previous 3 years combined. I kept my head down. I didn't post about it on social media. I didn't tell my family. I knew what would happen if I did. They would ask questions I wasn't ready to answer, offer opinions I didn't need, and worst of all, they would try to take credit. Derek would find a way to spin it like he had mentored me, like his advice had finally sunk in. My father would claim he always knew I had it in me. My mother would tell her friends that both her sons were successful now, as if my success validated her parenting. I didn't want any of that. I wanted to build something that was entirely mine, something they couldn't touch or rewrite. So I stayed quiet. I kept working my day job at a property management company, which gave me cover and kept my family from asking too many questions. I lived in a modest apartment, drove a 10-year-old sedan, and dressed like someone who was still figuring things out. To them, I was still Marcus, the struggling younger brother, the one who needed help, the one who would probably never quite make it. And I let them believe it. The portfolio grew. I brought on a partner, an investor named Richard Carr, who had been watching what I was doing and wanted in. He had capital, I had the deals and the operational know-how. We formed an LLC, split it 60-40 in my favor, and started acquiring properties faster. We moved beyond residential and into mixed-use buildings, small retail complexes, even a couple of older hotels that needed repositioning. Richard handled the finance side, I handled acquisitions and management. It worked. By the time Derek announced his engagement to Vanessa, I owned or controlled 23 properties across the metro area, with a portfolio value that had crossed 8 figures. I had more money than I knew what to do with, but I still showed up to family dinners in the same clothes, still drove the same car, still played the role they expected. It felt safer that way. Easier. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment to tell them, but the truth was, I didn't know if that moment would ever come. Part of me didn't want them to know. Part of me liked the idea of them underestimating me forever. Then came the engagement party. Derek and Vanessa rented out a private dining room at some exclusive club downtown, the kind of place with a waiting list and a dress code. I showed up in a blazer I had bought off the clearance rack and immediately felt underdressed. Everyone else looked like they had walked out of a magazine. My parents were there, beaming with pride, talking to Vanessa's parents, who were polite but distant, the kind of people who sized you up within 30 seconds and decided whether you were worth their time. I didn't pass the test. Derek pulled me aside early in the evening, drink in hand, grin wide. He clapped me on the shoulder, squeezed hard enough to make it uncomfortable. "I'm glad you made it," he said. "I know things have been tight for you. Vanessa and I wanted to make sure you felt included." I nodded, didn't correct him. He kept talking. "We're doing the wedding at the Grand Meridian. You know the place, right? Huge ballroom, waterfront views, the whole deal. It's going to be incredible. We've been planning this for months. Vanessa's parents are covering most of it, but I chipped in a good amount too. It's going to be the event of the year." I had heard of the Grand Meridian. It was one of the oldest hotels in the city, a historic landmark that had been family-owned for decades. Beautiful building, prime location, but it had been struggling financially for years. The owners were aging, the property needed updates, and they were sitting on a gold mine they didn't know how to manage. I had actually looked into it a few months earlier, reached out to the family through a broker, and started preliminary conversations about a purchase. They weren't ready to sell yet, but they were open to the idea. Derek kept talking, oblivious. "The venue alone is costing us a fortune, but it's worth it. Vanessa wanted something that would make a statement, and the Grand Meridian is perfect. I mean, it's not like we could do this at some budget hotel, right?" He laughed, took a sip of his drink. "You'll love it. We'll make sure you get a good seat, maybe near the back so you're close to the bar." He winked like he had just done me a favor. I smiled, nodded, and excused myself to the restroom. I stood at the sink, stared at my reflection in the mirror, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. Just clarity. I realized in that moment that no matter what I accomplished, No matter how much I built, they would never see me differently unless I forced them to. And even then, I wasn't sure it would matter. The months leading up to the wedding were a blur. Derek and Vanessa sent out elaborate invitations, posted constant updates on social media, and made sure everyone knew this was going to be the social event of the season. My mother called me every other week to ask if I needed help with my suit, if I was bringing a date, if I had bought a gift yet. The subtext was always the same. Don't embarrass us. Try to look presentable. Blend in. I played along. I RSVP'd yes, said I'd be coming alone, and assured her I would dress appropriately. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What I didn't tell her was that during those same months, I had been in quiet negotiations with the family that owned the Grand Meridian. The conversations had progressed. They were ready to sell. The hotel was bleeding money, deferred maintenance was piling up, and they didn't have the capital or the energy to turn it around. I made them an offer. It was fair, maybe even generous, but it was contingent on a fast close. They accepted. I signed the purchase agreement 6 weeks before Derek's wedding. The deal was structured so that the transition wouldn't be public until after closing, which was scheduled for 2 weeks after the wedding date. I paid in cash, a combination of liquidity from my portfolio and a bridge loan I secured in about 72 hours. The sellers wanted discretion, and I was happy to give it to them. As far as anyone knew, the Grand Meridian was still under the old family's ownership. No press release, no announcement, just a quiet transfer of the deed. I didn't tell anyone. Not Richard, not my parents, not Derek. I wanted to see how it would play out. I wanted to sit in that ballroom, surrounded by people who thought I was barely scraping by, and know that I owned every inch of the room. It felt petty, maybe it was, but I didn't care. I had spent years being underestimated, and I was done pretending it didn't bother me. The week before the wedding, Derek called me. He sounded stressed, which was unusual for him. Derek was always composed, always in control. But his voice had an edge to it. "Hey, I need to talk to you about something," he said. "Can you meet me for coffee?" I agreed, and we met at a place near his office the next morning. He looked tired. His tie was loosened, his hair wasn't as perfectly styled as usual. He ordered an espresso, drank it in 2 sips, and then leaned forward. "I'm going to be straight with you, Marcus. Things have been tough lately. The market's been unpredictable, and I made some investments that didn't pan out the way I expected. I'm not in trouble or anything, but cash flow has been tighter than I'd like." I didn't say anything, just waited for him to continue. He rubbed his face, exhaled. Vanessa's parents covered the venue and most of the big expenses, but there are a lot of smaller costs that added up. Flowers, photographers, the band, all of it. I've been carrying more of that than I planned. And honestly, I've been trying to keep up appearances. Vanessa's family has expectations, and I don't want them thinking I can't provide. I took a sip of my coffee, still didn't speak. Derek looked at me, something like embarrassment flickering across his face. "I know things haven't been great for you financially. I know you've had your struggles. But I wanted to give you a heads up that at the wedding, I might make a light-hearted comment about it. Nothing mean, just a joke. You know how these things go. People expect a little humor in the speeches." I set my cup down slowly. "What kind of joke?" He shrugged, tried to play it off. "Just something about how not everyone in the family is great with money, how we all have our strengths. It's not personal, Marcus. It's just part of the toast. People will laugh, and then we'll move on. It'll be fine." I stared at him. "You're going to make fun of me at your wedding." He sighed, leaned back. "Don't be so sensitive. It's not about you. It's about the moment. Weddings are about entertainment. People want to laugh. And honestly, if I don't say something, someone else will. You know how the family talks. At least if it comes from me, it'll be in good fun." I didn't argue. I just nodded, finished my coffee, and told him I'd see him at the wedding. He looked relieved, like he had expected more resistance. He clapped me on the shoulder again as we left, told me it was all going to be great, that I'd have a good time. I smiled, waved, and walked back to my car. Sitting in the driver's seat, I pulled out my phone and opened my email. I scrolled to the message from my lawyer confirming the purchase agreement for the Grand Meridian. The closing date was locked in. Everything was in motion. I read the email twice, then put the phone away and started the engine. I had one more week to get through. The day of the wedding arrived faster than I expected. I woke up early, went for a run, and then spent the afternoon going through documents related to the hotel purchase. My lawyer had sent over the final paperwork, everything was in order. The deed would officially transfer to me 2 weeks from now, but for all practical purposes, the Grand Meridian was already mine. I had reviewed the financials, walked through the property twice with my operations team, and started drafting a renovation plan. The hotel had good bones, and with the right updates, it could be a flagship property in my portfolio. I got dressed slowly, taking my time with the suit I had rented. It was nothing special, a basic black tuxedo that fit well enough. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. I didn't look like someone who owned a multimillion-dollar real estate portfolio. I looked like someone trying to blend in, trying not to draw attention. And that was exactly the point. I arrived at the Grand Meridian just as the sun was beginning to set. The hotel sat on the waterfront, its facade glowing in the golden light. Valet attendants were directing cars, guests were streaming in through the main entrance, and everything looked flawless. I handed my keys to the valet, a young guy in a burgundy jacket, and walked inside. The lobby was exactly as I remembered from my site visits. Marble floors, gold accents, a massive chandelier hanging from the vaulted ceiling. It was beautiful, even with the deferred maintenance. I could see the potential in every corner. A woman in a headset directed guests toward the ballroom. I followed the crowd, keeping my head down, scanning faces but not engaging. I recognized people from Derek's firm, some of Vanessa's family, a few distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. No one paid much attention to me. I was just another guest, unremarkable and easy to overlook. The ballroom was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the water, the last light of the day reflecting off the surface in shades of orange and pink. Round tables were arranged across the room, each one covered in white linens, gold-rimmed plates, and elaborate floral centerpieces. A string quartet played softly near the entrance. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Everything was perfect, polished, expensive. I found my assigned seat. Table 12, near the back, just like Derek had promised. My name was printed on a small card, Marcus Reid, no title, no description. Just my name. I sat down, adjusted my jacket, and watched as the room filled up. The energy was buzzing, people greeting each other, laughing, taking photos. Vanessa's family occupied the front tables, all of them dressed impeccably, dripping in jewelry and confidence. My parents were seated a few tables away, my mother in a navy dress, my father in a suit that looked slightly too tight. They waved when they saw me. I waved back. Derek and Vanessa made their entrance to applause. They looked perfect, like something out of a magazine. Vanessa's dress was elaborate, layers of silk and lace, a long train that trailed behind her. Derek wore a custom tuxedo, his hair slicked back, his smile wide. They walked to the head table, waving to guests, soaking in the attention. The ceremony had been earlier, a small private affair, and this reception was the main event. Dinner was served in courses. Some kind of salad with candied nuts, a fish course I didn't touch, a perfectly cooked steak that I ate slowly, and a dessert that was more decoration than food. The wine kept flowing, the conversations at my table were polite but shallow, and I found myself watching the room more than participating. I noticed the small details, the way the staff moved, the timing of the courses, the coordination of the lighting. This was a well-run event, but I also saw the cracks. The service was slightly slow, the acoustics in the room weren't great, and I could see water stains on the ceiling in a few places. The hotel needed work, but it was salvageable. After dessert, the speeches began. Vanessa's father went first, a rambling toast about love and family and the merging of two great households. It was pompous and forgettable. Vanessa's maid of honor went next, telling a story about their college days that got a few laughs. Then it was Derek's turn. He stood, microphone in hand, and the room fell silent. He started with the usual thank yous, acknowledging Vanessa's parents, the guests, the vendors. He was smooth, confident, working the room like he was giving a presentation to clients. People laughed at his jokes, nodded at his sentiments. He was in his element. Then he shifted gears. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about family lately," he said, his tone becoming more casual. "About what it means to support each other, to lift each other up. Vanessa and I are so lucky to have families that have always believed in us, that have given us the foundation to build something great." He paused, took a sip of champagne. "But not everyone has that same foundation. Not everyone has that same support. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, especially tonight." He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping across the room until it landed on me. "My younger brother Marcus is here tonight, and I want to take a moment to talk about him." My stomach tightened. The room shifted, heads turning in my direction. I felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes, all of them suddenly focused on me. Derek smiled, a warm, brotherly smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Marcus has had a tough few years. He's tried a lot of things, worked really hard, but life doesn't always go the way we plan. And recently, he's been going through something that I think a lot of people can relate to. Financial struggles." He paused for effect. "In fact, Marcus filed for bankruptcy a few months ago." The room went silent. Completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and steady in my ears. Derek kept talking, his voice full of false sympathy. "It's not something to be ashamed of. A lot of people go through it. But I wanted to mention it tonight because I think it's important to recognize that even when life knocks you down, you still show up. Marcus is here tonight, supporting his brother, even though I know things are hard for him right now. And I think that takes courage." He raised his glass. "So let's give Marcus a round of applause for showing up, for being here, for trying. Because that's what family does. We show up for each other, no matter what." The applause was scattered, awkward, confused. Some people clapped out of obligation, others just stared. I sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table, face neutral. Derek lowered his glass, his smile widening. "Love you, brother. Hang in there." He moved on to the next part of his speech, something about Vanessa and their future together, but I wasn't listening anymore. My mind was racing, but my body was calm. I had known this was coming. Derek had warned me. But hearing it, sitting through it, feeling the pity and judgment radiating from every corner of the room, it was different than I had imagined. I didn't stand up. Not yet. I just sat there, letting the moment settle, letting Derek finish his speech. He wrapped it up with another toast, and everyone raised their glasses. The band started playing, the energy in the room shifted back to celebration, and people returned to their conversations. But I could still feel the glances, the whispers. I could hear the judgment in the air. I stood slowly, pushed my chair back, and walked toward the exit. Not toward the door, but toward the small corridor that led to the hotel manager's office. I had been in that office twice during my site visits. I knew where it was. I walked calmly, purposefully, and no one stopped me. I reached the door, knocked once, and stepped inside. The hotel manager, an older man named Gregory, looked up from his desk. He recognized me immediately. His expression shifted from surprise to understanding. "Mr. Reid," he said, standing. "I wasn't expecting you tonight." "I know," I said. "I wanted to keep it low-key. But I need you to do something for me." He nodded, waiting. "I need you to pull up the event contract for tonight's wedding. I want to see the payment schedule." He hesitated for a moment, then turned to his computer. A few clicks later, he pulled up the document. I leaned over his shoulder and scanned the details. The deposit had been paid months ago by Vanessa's parents. The remaining balance, a significant amount, was due 2 weeks after the event. It hadn't been paid yet. I straightened up, adjusted my jacket. What's the cancellation policy? Gregory looked uncomfortable. According to the contract, if the balance isn't paid within 30 days of the event, the contract defaults and the deposit is forfeited. But Mr. Reid, this is a wedding. I'm not sure we should. I'm not canceling anything, I said calmly. I just want to know the terms. He nodded, still uneasy. I thanked him, left the office, and walked back toward the ballroom. The music was louder now, people were dancing, and the energy had shifted into full celebration mode. Derek was on the dance floor with Vanessa, spinning her around, both of them laughing. My parents were at their table, talking with some of Vanessa's relatives. No one noticed me slip back into the room. I returned to my seat at table 12 and sat down. One of the other guests, a guy I didn't know, leaned over. That was rough, man. What your brother said. You doing okay? I looked at him, smiled. I'm doing fine. Better than fine, actually. He looked confused but didn't push. I turned my attention back to the dance floor, watching Derek and Vanessa, watching the crowd, watching the whole spectacle unfold. I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and reread the purchase agreement one more time. The Grand Meridian Hotel. Purchased by Reid Properties LLC. Closing in 14 days. I put the phone away, leaned back in my chair, and let myself smile. Just a little. Just enough. They had no idea. Not Derek, not Vanessa, not anyone in this room. They were celebrating in a building I owned, drinking champagne I would profit from, dancing on floors that were mine. And in 2 weeks, when the deed officially transferred and the news went public, they would all know. But for now, I was content to sit in the back, watch them celebrate, and wait for the perfect moment. Because I wasn't done. Not even close. This was just the beginning. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to 17 missed calls. Most of them were from my mother, a few from distant relatives, and one from my father that had come in at 6 in the morning. I didn't listen to any of the voicemails. I knew what they would say. Concern mixed with disappointment, questions about why I hadn't told them about the bankruptcy, offers of help that came with strings attached. I deleted them all and went for a run instead. The city was quiet at that hour, the streets still empty except for a few early risers walking their dogs. I ran along the waterfront, past the Grand Meridian, and slowed my pace as I approached. The hotel looked different in the morning light, less glamorous, more worn. I could see the places where the paint was chipping, where the stonework needed repointing, where years of deferred maintenance had taken their toll. But I could also see what it would become. In my mind, I was already redesigning the lobby, updating the guest rooms, modernizing the restaurant. This wasn't just a property. It was a statement. I finished my run and headed home. My apartment was small, deliberately so. 1 bedroom, minimal furniture, nothing that suggested wealth or success. I had chosen this place specifically because it reinforced the narrative my family believed about me. Struggling younger brother, barely making ends meet, living in a modest apartment because that was all he could afford. The truth was, I owned the building. I had bought it 2 years ago as part of a portfolio acquisition, renovated the units, and kept one for myself. The rent I paid went into my own LLC. It was a perfect cover. I showered, made coffee, and sat down at my desk. My laptop was already open to a spreadsheet tracking the performance of all my properties. Occupancy rates, cash flow, maintenance schedules, upcoming lease renewals. Everything was color-coded, organized, optimized. I had built systems that ran themselves, teams that handled day-to-day operations, and a structure that allowed me to stay invisible while the business grew. Richard handled most of the external relationships, the meetings with brokers and bankers and investors. I preferred to work behind the scenes, analyzing deals, identifying opportunities, making decisions without anyone knowing who was making them. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Saw the news about your brother's wedding. You okay? I typed back quickly. Fine. Just theater. He responded immediately. Want to grab lunch? We should talk about the Meridian closing. I agreed and we set a time. Richard and I met at a diner near his office, the kind of place with vinyl booths and laminated menus. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in the back corner, coffee in front of him. Richard was in his mid-50s, gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, always dressed like he had just come from a board meeting. He had made his money in commercial real estate in the 80s and 90s, rode the boom, survived the crashes, and came out with enough capital to be selective about his investments. When he first approached me 3 years ago, I thought he was running a scam. Nobody offers partnership terms that favorable unless they're desperate or lying. But Richard was neither. He had seen what I was building, recognized the strategy, and wanted to be part of it. We shook hands, formed an LLC, and never looked back. He slid a folder across the table as I sat down. Closing documents for the Meridian. Everything's in order. Wire transfer is scheduled for next Friday. After that, it's official. I opened the folder, scanned the pages. The purchase price, the payment schedule, the transfer of title. All of it exactly as we had negotiated. I closed the folder and pushed it back toward him. Good. Let's make sure the announcement is coordinated. I want the press release to go out the same day the deed records. Richard nodded. You sure you want to go public with this? I know you've kept a low profile. I sipped my coffee, considered the question. I had thought about this for weeks. Part of me wanted to stay in the shadows, to keep building quietly without the attention. But another part of me, the part that had sat through Derek's speech, that had endured years of condescension and dismissal, that part wanted them to know. Not for revenge, exactly. Just for the record. So they would understand that they had been wrong. That I wasn't who they thought I was. That I had never been. I'm sure, I said. It's time. Richard studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right. I'll coordinate with the PR team. We'll frame it as a major acquisition, highlight the renovation plans, position you as the lead investor. It'll get coverage. I sat back in the booth. That's fine. Just make sure the details are accurate. I don't want any exaggeration. Just the facts. He smiled slightly. The facts are impressive enough. We ordered food, talked through the logistics of the transition. The existing staff at the Meridian would stay on during the renovation, though some roles would change. Gregory, the manager, would report directly to me now. We were bringing in a new operations director, someone with experience in boutique hotel management. The renovation budget was set, contractors were lined up, and we had a timeline that would see the hotel fully updated and reopened within 8 months. It was ambitious, but doable. After lunch, I drove across town to meet with my attorney. Her office was in a high-rise downtown, sleek and modern, the kind of place that charged by the quarter hour. Elena Martinez had been handling my legal work since the beginning, setting up LLCs, reviewing contracts, managing closings. She was sharp, efficient, and discreet. When I walked into her office, she was already pulling files. Marcus, she said, gesturing to a chair. I've been reviewing the Meridian purchase. Everything looks clean. No liens, no encumbrances, title is clear. The sellers are eager to close, so I don't anticipate any delays. She paused, looked at me over her reading glasses. I also saw the guest list from the wedding. Your brother was on it. I assume you're aware of the optics here. I leaned forward. What optics? She set the file down. You're buying the venue where your brother just had his wedding, days after he publicly announced your supposed bankruptcy. When this becomes public knowledge, people are going to draw conclusions. The press will have a field day. Your family will have questions. She folded her hands. I just want to make sure you're prepared for that. I nodded slowly. I'm prepared. Elena studied me for a moment, then shrugged. All right. Just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. She handed me a pen. I need your signature on a few final documents. Transfer authorizations, closing disclosures, the usual. I signed where she indicated, each signature bringing me closer to the moment when the Meridian would officially be mine. When I finished, Elena collected the papers and filed them away. You'll have the fully executed documents by end of day Friday. Congratulations, Marcus. This is a significant acquisition. I stood, shook her hand. Thanks for keeping this quiet. She smiled. That's what you pay me for. The rest of the week passed in a blur of meetings and preparations. I walked through the Meridian property twice more, taking notes, photographing details, mapping out the renovation in my head. I met with architects, reviewed design proposals, and approved initial budgets. The hotel had good bones, but it needed modern updates. New HVAC systems, updated electrical, refurbished guest rooms, a complete overhaul of the restaurant and bar. The ballroom where Derek's wedding had taken place would stay largely the same. It was the hotel's signature space, but we would upgrade the lighting, improve the acoustics, and refinish the floors. During those days, my phone kept ringing. My mother called 3 times. I let it go to voicemail each time. My father sent a text asking if I was okay, if I needed money. I didn't respond. Derek called once, left a message that started with an apology and ended with an explanation about how he thought public acknowledgement would help me feel supported. I deleted it without listening to the whole thing. Vanessa sent a message through social media saying she hoped I wasn't upset, that Derek had meant well. I archived it. I wasn't angry. I was focused. Anger would have been a distraction, and I didn't have time for distractions. I had a closing to finalize, a renovation to launch, and a narrative to rewrite. Everything else was noise. Friday arrived. I woke up early, dressed in a suit, and drove to Elena's office. Richard was already there, along with the seller's attorney and a representative from the title company. We sat around a conference table, documents spread out in front of us. The closing took less than an hour. Signatures, wire confirmations, notarizations. At 10:15 in the morning, the deed to the Grand Meridian Hotel transferred to Reid Properties LLC. I shook hands with the sellers, an elderly couple who looked relieved to be done with the burden of ownership. They thanked me for preserving the hotel's legacy, for committing to restore it rather than tear it down. I assured them I would. After they left, Richard and I stayed behind with Elena. She handed me a leather portfolio containing all the final documents. Official copies of the deed, the title insurance policy, the closing statement. Everything that proved the hotel was now mine. I flipped through the pages, feeling the weight of what we had just done. This wasn't just another property. This was the Grand Meridian. A landmark. A statement. And it was mine. Elena pulled up her email. The press release is ready to go. I've coordinated with the local business journal and a few industry publications. As soon as I hit send, it's out there. Are we ready? I looked at Richard. He nodded. I turned back to Elena. Send it. She clicked the mouse. Done. The press release went to a dozen outlets simultaneously, announcing the acquisition of the Grand Meridian Hotel by Reid Properties LLC, highlighting the planned renovation, and identifying me as the principal owner and lead investor. Within minutes, I started getting notifications. The Business Journal posted it on their website first, then a real estate trade publication picked it up, then the local news stations. By noon, it was trending on regional social media. My phone started buzzing with messages almost immediately. Colleagues I hadn't heard from in months, old contacts reaching out to congratulate me, brokers pitching new deals. I ignored most of them. But then I saw a message from someone I didn't expect. Thomas Brennan, a journalist who covered real estate and business for the city's main newspaper. His message was direct. Marcus, I'm writing a piece on the Meridian acquisition. I noticed the timing coincides with a wedding that took place there last weekend. Your brother's wedding, if I'm not mistaken. I'd love to get your comment. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a response. Happy to talk. Let's set up a time next week. He replied immediately with his availability, and we scheduled a call. I knew what he was after. The story wasn't just about a real estate deal. It was about the contrast, the irony, the human angle. Younger brother announces bankruptcy at wedding held at venue he secretly owns. It was too good not to write about. And honestly, I didn't mind. Let them write it. Let them connect the dots. It would save me the trouble of explaining. By mid-afternoon, my family had started to notice. My mother called, frantic. Marcus, what is this? I'm seeing articles about you buying a hotel. The Grand Meridian? Is this true? I answered this time, kept my voice calm. Yes, it's true. I closed on the property this morning. There was a long silence. Then she said, voice shaking, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you say anything? We thought you were in trouble. Derek said you filed for bankruptcy. I let the silence stretch for a moment before responding. I never filed for bankruptcy, Mom. Derek made that up. Or assumed it. I'm not sure which. But it's not true. Another silence. Then I don't understand. If you have money to buy hotels, why are you living in that tiny apartment? Why do you drive that old car? Why did you let us think you were struggling? Because it was easier, I said. Because if I had told you, you would have treated me differently. You would have asked for things, expected things, made it about you. And I didn't want that. I wanted to build something on my own terms, without your opinions, without your judgment. She started to protest, but I cut her off gently. I have to go, Mom. We can talk about this later. I hung up before she could respond. Derek called 10 minutes later. I let it ring. He called again. I declined it. Then he sent a text. We need to talk. Now. I typed back. Not now. He replied immediately. You humiliated me. Everyone's asking questions. People saw the articles. They know the wedding was at your hotel. I read the message, felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt. Just facts. I put the phone on silent and went back to work. That evening, I met with my operations team at the Meridian. We walked through the property room by room, discussing priorities, identifying quick wins and long-term projects. The executive suites needed the most work, but the standard rooms could be refreshed with new furniture and finishes. The lobby would get a complete redesign, more modern, more open, while still respecting the building's historic character. We talked about staffing, about training, about how to maintain service during renovation. Gregory, the manager, was nervous but engaged. He had worked at the Meridian for 15 years and didn't want to see it decline further. I assured him we were investing to make it better, not to strip it down. As we wrapped up the meeting, Gregory pulled me aside. Mr. Reid, I have to ask. Your brother's wedding. Did you know when you were sitting there that you had bought this place? I looked at him, considered how to answer. Yes, I knew. He processed that for a moment. That must have been strange. I nodded. It was. But it was also clarifying. He didn't push for more, just shook my hand and said he was glad the hotel was in good hands. I left the Meridian around 8, drove home through traffic, and finally allowed myself to feel the weight of the day. The closing had gone smoothly. The press release had landed exactly as intended. The renovation was moving forward. Everything was on track. But there was still unfinished business. My family knew about the hotel now, but they didn't understand the full scope of what I had built. They still thought this was a one-off, a lucky deal, an anomaly. They didn't know about the other 22 properties, the portfolio that had been generating cash flow for years, the partnerships and investments that had made this acquisition possible. I pulled out my laptop and opened a document I had been drafting for weeks. A detailed breakdown of my holdings, my net worth, my trajectory. Not for public consumption. Just for the record. Just so that if it ever came to a confrontation, I would have the facts ready. Line by line, property by property, I had documented everything. The first 2 buildings I had bought with seller financing. The 7 properties I had acquired in the next 18 months. The commercial building I had converted to co-working space. The equity I had pulled out and reinvested. The LLC structure Richard and I had created. The portfolio value that had grown from nothing to 8 figures in less than 4 years. I saved the document, closed the laptop, and poured myself a drink. Whiskey, neat, the good kind I kept for moments like this. I sat on my couch, stared out the window at the city lights, and let myself think about what came next. The Meridian was just the beginning. There were other properties I was tracking, other opportunities one was evaluating. But before I moved forward, I needed to deal with the noise. The questions, the assumptions, the family drama that was inevitably coming. My phone buzzed. Another text from Derek. This one was longer, more desperate. Marcus, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said what I said at the wedding. I thought I was helping. I thought you needed support. I didn't know about the hotel. I didn't know about any of this. Can we please talk? I need to explain. I read it twice, then set the phone down without responding. Not yet. He could wait. They all could. I had spent years waiting for them to see me, waiting for recognition, waiting for respect. They could spend a few days waiting for me. The weekend passed quietly. I avoided my phone, ignored the messages piling up, and focused on work. I reviewed contractor bids for the Meridian, met with designers to finalize the lobby concept, and walked through 2 other properties I was considering for acquisition. One was a mid-century office building downtown that had been sitting vacant for 6 months. The owner was motivated, the price was reasonable, and the location was prime. The other was a small apartment complex on the east side that needed significant updates but had strong rental demand. Both deals had potential, but I wasn't ready to commit yet. The Meridian renovation would consume most of my attention for the next several months, and I didn't want to overextend. Sunday evening, I finally listened to my voicemails. My mother had left 4 more, each one progressively more emotional. The first was confusion, the second was hurt, the third was anger, and the fourth was an attempt at reconciliation. She wanted me to come to dinner, to sit down with the family and talk this through. My father had left one message, short and stiff, saying he would like an explanation when I had time. Derek had left 3. The first was an apology, the second was defensive, and the third was accusatory. He wanted to know why I had let him embarrass himself, why I hadn't warned him, why I had made him look foolish in front of everyone. I deleted them all. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. I needed space to think, space to process, space to decide how I wanted to handle this. Because the truth was, I didn't owe them an explanation. I had built something on my own, without their help, without their support, and I had every right to keep it private until I was ready to share it. The fact that they felt blindsided wasn't my problem. It was theirs. But I also knew I couldn't avoid them forever. Eventually, there would have to be a conversation. Eventually, I would have to sit across from Derek and hear his excuses, sit across from my parents and hear their disappointment that I hadn't confided in them. Eventually, I would have to decide whether I wanted them to be part of my life going forward, and if so, on what terms. Monday morning, I called Thomas Brennan, the journalist. We spoke for 30 minutes. He asked about the acquisition, about my background, about the timing. He was professional, not sensational, and I appreciated that. I gave him the facts. I had been working in real estate for several years, built a portfolio quietly, saw an opportunity with the Meridian, and moved on it. Yes, my brother's wedding had taken place there. No, that wasn't a factor in the purchase decision. The property was a good investment, the timing was coincidental. He asked if there was tension between us. I said families are complicated and left it at that. The article came out Wednesday. It was fair, balanced, and thorough. It detailed the acquisition, highlighted my background in property management, and mentioned the wedding only in passing. There was a quote from Richard praising the strategic vision behind the purchase, and a comment from the previous owners expressing confidence in the renovation plans. At the bottom, there was a brief mention of my brother, noting that he was a senior executive at a wealth management firm and had recently married at the venue. No drama, no sensationalism. Just facts. But the comments section on the article's online version told a different story. People connected the dots immediately. Wait, his brother announced his bankruptcy at a wedding held in a hotel he secretly owned? That's some next-level irony. Someone else wrote, imagine humiliating your sibling in public only to find out they're actually more successful than you. Another comment said, I would pay money to see the brother's face when he found out. The story took on a life of its own, shared and reshared on social media, turning into a viral moment about family dynamics and hidden success. I watched it unfold from a distance, detached and analytical. This was exactly what I had expected. People love stories like this. Underdog makes good, proves doubters wrong, flips the script. It was satisfying in a way that transcended the specifics of my situation. It was universal. And while I hadn't sought out the attention, I wasn't going to run from it either. If this was how the narrative played out, so be it. Thursday afternoon, my mother called again. This time, I answered. Marcus, we need to talk. Your father and I want you to come to dinner this weekend. Just family. No drama, no confrontation. We just want to understand. I hesitated. Who's going to be there? Just us, she said. And Derek and Vanessa, if they're willing to come. I closed my eyes, weighed the options. Part of me wanted to refuse, to let them stew in their confusion a while longer. But another part knew this was inevitable. Might as well get it over with. Fine, I said. Saturday night. I'll be there. She sounded relieved. Thank you, Marcus. We love you. You know that, right? I didn't respond to that. I just confirmed the time and hung up. Saturday arrived cold and gray, the kind of day that made you want to stay inside. I spent the morning reviewing financial statements, the afternoon at the gym, and the early evening preparing for what would likely be an uncomfortable dinner. I chose my clothes carefully. Not too formal, not too casual. I wanted to look successful but not showy. I wanted them to see that I had changed, that I wasn't the struggling younger brother anymore, but I didn't want to rub it in their faces. At least not yet. I arrived at my parents' house just after 6. The driveway was full. Derek's car was there, so was Vanessa's. I parked on the street and walked to the front door. My mother answered before I could knock, pulling me into a hug that lasted too long. I'm so glad you came, she whispered. I patted her back awkwardly and stepped inside. The house smelled like roast chicken and vegetables, familiar and comforting in a way that made my chest tighten. My father was in the living room, standing by the fireplace with a drink in his hand. He nodded when he saw me. Marcus. I nodded back. Dad. Derek was on the couch, Vanessa beside him. They both looked tense. Derek stood when I entered, offered his hand. I shook it, brief and formal. Thanks for coming, he said. I didn't respond. We moved to the dining room, took our seats around the table. My mother served dinner, filling plates with practiced efficiency, trying to create normalcy through routine. For a few minutes, no one spoke. We just ate, the silence heavy and charged. Then my father cleared his throat. So, Marcus. A hotel. That's quite an investment. I looked up from my plate. It is. He took a sip of wine. How long have you been in real estate? A few years, I said. Started small, grew it over time. My mother leaned forward. But why didn't you tell us? We could have helped. We could have supported you. I set my fork down carefully. You couldn't have helped, Mom. And I didn't need support. I needed to do this on my own. Derek spoke up, voice tight. You let me make a fool of myself. You sat there at my wedding and let me tell everyone you were bankrupt when you knew it wasn't true. You let me look like an idiot. I turned to face him. You made yourself look like an idiot, Derek. I didn't say anything. You assumed, and you announced your assumption to 300 people without checking if it was true. That's on you, not me. His face flushed. I was trying to be supportive. I was trying to acknowledge your struggles. What struggles? I asked. What exactly did you think I was struggling with? He stammered. You never talked about work. You lived in a tiny apartment. You drove an old car. You never seemed to have money. I leaned back in my chair. I never talked about work because you never asked. You assumed I was struggling because I didn't broadcast success the way you do. You judged me based on appearances, and you were wrong. Vanessa spoke up, her voice defensive. Derek was trying to help. He thought you needed family support during a difficult time. I looked at her. Did he? Or did he see an opportunity to position himself as the generous older brother, the one who lifts others up? Because from where I sat, it felt more like performance than support. She fell silent. Derek's jaw clenched. That's not fair, he said. I've always been there for you. Have you? I asked. Because I don't remember you being there when I was starting out. I don't remember you offering advice or connections or encouragement. I remember you offering criticism, judgment, and lectures about responsibility. I remember you using my failures as punchlines at family dinners. So forgive me if I don't see your wedding toast as supportive. The table went quiet. My mother's eyes were watering. My father stared into his wine glass. Derek looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Finally, my mother spoke, voice shaking. We didn't know, Marcus. We didn't know you were doing so well. We thought we were helping by not putting pressure on you. I looked at her, softened slightly. I know you thought that, Mom. But your version of not putting pressure on me felt a lot like dismissal. Like you had given up on me ever succeeding. And maybe that's what I needed to prove you wrong. My father set his glass down. So what now? You've made your point. You're successful. You own a hotel. What do you want from us? I considered the question. It was a good one. What did I want? An apology? Recognition? Respect? All of those things felt hollow now that I was sitting here. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. I had spent so long building toward this moment, imagining how it would feel to reveal the truth, but now that I was here, it just felt empty. I don't want anything, I said finally. I just want you to understand that I'm not who you thought I was. I never have been. Derek leaned forward. So that's it? You're just going to hold this over us? Use it to make us feel guilty? I shook my head. I'm not holding anything over you. I'm just stating facts. You made assumptions about my life, and you were wrong. That's not my fault. He stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. I apologized. I said I was sorry. What more do you want? I stayed seated, kept my voice level. I want you to understand why I didn't tell you. I want you to understand that your words have consequences. You didn't just make a joke at your wedding. You tried to define me in front of everyone we know. You tried to shape how people saw me. And the only reason it backfired is because I had already shaped myself into something you couldn't see. Derek stared at me, breathing hard, then turned and walked out of the room. Vanessa followed him. I heard the front door open and close, then the sound of their car starting in the driveway. My mother started crying. My father just sat there, looking older than I had ever seen him. I pushed my chair back, stood slowly. I should go. My mother reached for my hand. Please don't. We need to talk about this. We need to work through this. I squeezed her hand gently. We will, Mom. Just not tonight. I walked to the door, grabbed my coat, and stepped out into the cold evening air. As I drove away, I could see my mother standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the warm light of the house. I felt a pang of something, guilt maybe, or regret. But I kept driving. The truth was out now. They knew what I had built, knew that I wasn't the person they thought I was. But that knowledge hadn't brought us closer. If anything, it had created more distance. And maybe that was okay. Maybe some gaps were meant to stay open. Maybe some stories didn't end with reconciliation. Maybe they just ended with understanding, even if that understanding came too late. 3 weeks passed before Derek reached out again. Not with a phone call or a text, but with an email. The subject line read, "Can we meet?" The body was brief, almost formal. Marcus, I know things ended badly at dinner. I've had time to think, and I'd like to talk. No parents, no Vanessa. Just us. Let me know if you're open to it. I read it twice, set my phone down, and went back to reviewing architectural drawings for the Meridian's lobby renovation. The hotel transformation was moving faster than expected. We had gutted 3 floors of guest rooms, stripped wallpaper that had been up since the 90s, and were in the process of installing new plumbing and electrical throughout the building. The construction noise was constant, dust was everywhere, but progress was visible. Gregory reported that advance bookings were already coming in for the grand reopening, scheduled for 6 months out. People wanted to see what the Meridian would become under new ownership. The press coverage had generated interest, and interest generated revenue. I waited 2 days before responding to Derek's email. Finally, I typed, Saturday afternoon. Coffee shop on Bennett Street. 3 o'clock. He replied within minutes. I'll be there. Thank you. Saturday came with clear skies and crisp air, the kind of weather that made the city feel alive. I arrived at the coffee shop early, ordered black coffee, and took a seat by the window. The place was half full, quiet enough for conversation but public enough to keep things civil. I watched people pass by on the sidewalk, couples walking dogs, joggers, families with strollers. Normal life, uncomplicated life, the kind I had chosen to leave behind when I decided to build something bigger than myself. Derek walked in at 3 on the dot. He looked different than he had at the wedding or even at the family dinner. Less polished, more worn. His hair wasn't perfectly styled, his clothes were casual, and there were shadows under his eyes that makeup couldn't hide. He spotted me, walked over, and sat down without ordering anything. Thanks for meeting me, he said. His voice was quieter than usual, lacking the confidence that typically carried his words. I nodded, sipped my coffee, waited for him to continue. He rubbed his face, exhaled slowly. I've been doing a lot of thinking. About the wedding, about what I said, about everything. And I need to be honest with you about something. I set my cup down. Go ahead. He looked out the window, then back at me. Things haven't been as good as I've made them seem. Work has been difficult. I made some investments last year that went bad. Really bad. I lost a significant amount of money, and I've been trying to cover it up, trying to maintain the image that everything's fine. Vanessa doesn't even know the full extent of it. I leaned back in my chair, processed what he was saying. How bad? He swallowed hard. Bad enough that we might have to sell the house. Bad enough that I've been borrowing from credit lines I shouldn't be touching. Bad enough that when I stood up at my wedding and talked about your bankruptcy, part of me was projecting. Because I'm closer to that reality than you ever were. The confession hung in the air between us. I hadn't expected this. I had expected defensiveness, maybe another apology, but not vulnerability. Not honesty. Derek continued, his voice strained. When I found out about the hotel, about everything you've built, it destroyed me. Not because you succeeded, but because I realized I had been so focused on maintaining appearances that I missed what was actually happening. You were building something real while I was building a facade. And when that facade started cracking, I tried to shore it up by putting you down. By making myself feel better at your expense. I watched him carefully. Why are you telling me this? He met my eyes. Because you deserve to know the truth. Because I owe you an actual apology, not the surface level one I gave at dinner. And because I need your advice. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. You want my advice? He nodded. You've done what I've been trying to do for years. You've built something sustainable, something that doesn't depend on perception or luck. I don't know how you did it, but I need to learn. I need to figure out how to get out of this hole I've dug. I picked up my coffee, took a long sip, considered my response. The part of me that remembered every insult, every dismissive comment, every moment of being overlooked wanted to tell him to figure it out himself. But another part, the part that had sat across from him growing up, that had looked up to him before the competition and comparison poisoned everything, that part felt something different. Not sympathy exactly, but understanding. How much do you owe? I asked. He gave me a number. It was substantial but not insurmountable. I did some mental math, calculated what it would take to restructure that kind of debt. You need to consolidate, I said. Stop using credit to cover credit. You need a single loan at a fixed rate, pay it down systematically, and cut expenses until you're cash flow positive again. He nodded, listening. And you need to stop performing, I added. Stop trying to look successful and focus on actually being solvent. That means downsizing, cutting the luxury spending, being honest with Vanessa about where you actually stand. He winced. She's not going to take it well. Probably not, I agreed. But she'll take it worse if you keep hiding it and everything collapses. Be honest now while you still have options. He was quiet for a moment. Can you help me? I mean, not financially. I'm not asking for money. But advice, guidance, maybe introduce me to people who can help restructure this. I considered it. A month ago, I would have said no immediately. But sitting here, seeing him stripped of the arrogance and bravado, I realized that holding on to resentment was only hurting me. It wasn't making me stronger or more successful. It was just making me tired. I'll connect you with my financial advisor, I said. She specializes in debt restructuring. But you have to be completely transparent with her. No hiding assets, no minimizing the problem. Full disclosure. He nodded quickly. I will. I promise. And Marcus, I'm sorry. Genuinely sorry. Not just for the wedding, but for years of treating you like you were less than me. You were never less. I just needed you to be so I could feel better about myself. I took that in, let it settle. I appreciate you saying that. He stood, extended his hand. I shook it, and for the first time in years, it felt like shaking hands with my brother, not with a competitor or a critic. Just my brother. After he left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, watching the city move around me. Something had shifted in that conversation. Not forgiveness exactly, but a release. I had spent so long carrying the weight of their judgment that I hadn't realized how heavy it was until I started to put it down. Derek's apology didn't erase what had happened, but it opened a door I hadn't known was closed. The possibility that family could be more than performance, more than competition. Maybe even something worth salvaging. The next week brought unexpected developments. The Business Journal ran a feature story on the Meridian renovation, complete with renderings of the updated lobby and guest rooms. The article positioned the project as part of a larger trend of historic hotel revivals, and it included quotes from me about preserving architectural heritage while modernizing amenities. The response was overwhelmingly positive. I started getting inquiries from other property owners, people who had historic buildings they wanted to sell or partner on. Richard fielded most of the calls, filtering out the tire kickers and bringing me only the serious opportunities. One of those opportunities caught my attention. A woman named Catherine Oakes reached out through my attorney. She owned a small chain of boutique inns across the state, properties her family had operated for 3 generations. She was in her 70s, had no children interested in taking over the business, and was looking for a buyer who would maintain the character of the properties rather than flip them for quick profit. Elena forwarded me the preliminary information, and I spent an evening reviewing it. The numbers were solid. The inns were well maintained, profitable, and had loyal customer bases. The locations were strategic, spread across tourist destinations and business hubs. This wasn't just an acquisition, it was a platform for expansion into hospitality management beyond single properties. I called Richard. "What do you think?" He had already reviewed the materials. "I think it's a natural next step. You've proven you can turn around a flagship property like the Meridian. A small chain would diversify the portfolio and give us recurring revenue streams. It's worth exploring." I set up a meeting with Catherine for the following week. We met at one of her inns, a converted Victorian mansion in the mountains about 2 hours outside the city. The property was immaculate, every detail thoughtfully curated, from the antique furniture in the lobby to the hand-stitched quilts on the beds. Catherine gave me a tour, pointing out original architectural features, telling stories about guests who had visited over the decades, explaining her philosophy of hospitality. She wasn't just selling buildings. She was entrusting a legacy. We sat in her office, a cozy room with a fireplace and walls lined with leather-bound guest registers dating back to the 1940s. "I've been watching what you're doing with the Meridian," she said. "I like your approach. You're not gutting the soul of the place to chase trends. You're respecting what it was while making it viable for what it needs to be. That's rare." "I appreciate that," I said. "Your properties have that same quality. They feel authentic." She smiled. "That's the word I've been looking for. Authentic. So many places now feel manufactured, designed by committee to appeal to algorithms. I want these inns to go to someone who understands that hospitality is about people, not just profit margins." We talked numbers, terms, transition plans. She wanted to stay involved for the first year, helping train staff and maintain relationships with long-term guests. I agreed. Her knowledge was valuable, and continuity mattered in this kind of business. By the end of the meeting, we had the framework of a deal. I would acquire the chain, she would consult during the transition, and we would preserve the character that made each property unique. We shook hands, and I drove back to the city feeling like I had just added a new dimension to what I was building. The Meridian renovation reached a milestone. The lobby was finished, and it was stunning. We had kept the original marble floors, restored the coffered ceiling, and added modern furniture that complemented rather than competed with the historic architecture. New lighting transformed the space, making it feel both grand and welcoming. Gregory organized a soft opening for local business leaders and press, a chance to showcase the progress before the full reopening. I stood in the corner during the event, watching people move through the space, hearing their reactions. The feedback was universally positive. This was what success looked like when you did it right. My mother called that evening. I answered, still riding the high of the lobby reveal. "Marcus, I saw photos from the hotel event. It looks beautiful." Her voice was warm but tentative. "Thank you," I said. "It's coming together." She paused. "Your father and I have been talking. We want to be more involved in your life, in what you're building. We realize we haven't been supportive, and we want to change that." I walked to the window, looked out at the city lights. "What does being involved look like to you?" She hesitated. "I don't know exactly. Maybe coming to visit the hotel, meeting your business partners, just being present. We don't want to be shut out." I softened. "You're not shut out, Mom. But I need you to understand that my life doesn't look like what you expected. I'm not going to have Sunday dinners every week or check in constantly. I'm building something, and that takes all my time and energy." "I understand," she said. "We just want to be part of it, even if it's on your terms." I thought about that. "Okay. Come to the grand reopening. Bring Dad." I'll make sure you have good seats, and you can see what I've built." She sounded relieved. "We'd love that. Thank you." After we hung up, I realized that extending the invitation hadn't felt like a concession. It felt like a choice, one I was making from a position of strength rather than obligation. The next few months blurred together. The Meridian grand reopening was a success, covered by local and regional media, fully booked for the first 3 months. The guest reviews praised the blend of historic charm and modern comfort, exactly what we had aimed for. My parents attended, and I watched them take in the space with something like pride. My father shook my hand, told me I had done well. My mother teared up during the ribbon cutting. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a step. Derek came too, with Vanessa. They had downsized to a smaller condo, sold the luxury cars, and were working through his debt systematically. He looked lighter somehow, less burdened by the need to perform. We didn't talk much during the event, just exchanged a few words, but there was an ease between us that hadn't existed before. He was rebuilding, and I was continuing to build. We were finally on parallel paths instead of competing ones. The boutique and acquisition closed. Catherine transitioned ownership smoothly, introducing me to key staff, walking me through operational details, and gradually stepping back as I took the reins. The properties performed well, and within 6 months, we had increased occupancy rates across the board through targeted marketing and minor upgrades. Richard and I started discussing the next phase of expansion, looking at markets beyond our region, considering partnerships with other independent operators. One afternoon, I stood in the Meridian lobby, watching guests check in, listening to the hum of conversation and activity. This space, this building that had been the site of my greatest humiliation, was now the flagship of everything I had built. Not because I had sought revenge or tried to prove anyone wrong, but because I had seen an opportunity and executed on it. The humiliation at Derek's wedding had been the catalyst, but it wasn't the foundation. The foundation was years of quiet work, disciplined decisions, and a refusal to let other people's perceptions define my reality. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Another hotel opportunity just hit my desk. Historic property downtown, distressed sale. Interested? I typed back, "Send me the details." As I put the phone away, I caught my reflection in one of the lobby mirrors. I looked different than I had at Derek's wedding. Not just older, but more settled. More certain. I had built something that mattered, something that would outlast the petty dramas and family tensions. The story could have ended with the wedding revelation, with Derek's public embarrassment and my private victory. But that would have been incomplete. The real story was what came after, the choice to move forward instead of staying stuck in resentment. The decision to help Derek when he asked, not because he deserved it, but because holding on to anger was exhausting. The realization that success wasn't about proving others wrong, it was about building something meaningful regardless of what they thought. I walked out of the lobby and into the evening air. The waterfront stretched out before me, lights reflecting off the water, the city alive and indifferent to my small dramas. I had bought this hotel, transformed it, and turned it into something valuable. But more importantly, I had transformed myself. From someone who absorbed other people's judgments to someone who defined success on his own terms. That transformation was worth more than any property, any portfolio, any balance sheet. Derek called later that week. He had been offered a new position at a different firm, a step down in title but more stable, with better long-term prospects. He sounded hopeful in a way I hadn't heard in years. "I think I'm going to take it," he said. "It's not flashy, but it's solid. And honestly, I'm tired of flashy." I told him it sounded like a good move. He thanked me again for connecting him with the financial advisor, said it had made all the difference. We hung up, and I realized I was genuinely happy for him. The following month, I signed the papers on my 4th major acquisition. The property was a struggling resort 2 hours north, another historic site with potential. As I reviewed the documents, I thought about how far I had come from those first 2 buildings purchased with seller financing. The portfolio had grown beyond what I had imagined, but more than that, my understanding of what I was building had evolved. This wasn't just about real estate or returns on investment. It was about creating spaces where people's lives intersected, where memories were made, where ordinary moments became significant. I called my team together for a planning session, spread out the resort blueprints on the conference table, and started outlining our vision. The renovation would take 18 months, require significant capital, and test every system we had built. But I wasn't intimidated. I had learned that the biggest challenges created the most meaningful results. We worked through the afternoon, brainstorming ideas, solving problems, building momentum. As the sun set and the team filtered out, Richard stayed behind. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from the bottle we kept in the conference room and handed me one. "To growth," he said, raising his glass. I clinked mine against his. "To growth." We drank, and he studied me for a moment. "You know, when I first partnered with you, I thought you were just a sharp kid with good instincts. But watching you handle everything that happened with your family, the way you turned that situation into something productive, that showed me you're more than just a good investor. You're someone who understands that business is ultimately about people." I set my glass down. "I'm still figuring that out." He shook his head. "No, you've already figured it out. You just don't realize it yet. That hotel purchase wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming your narrative. And that's what great leaders do. They write their own stories instead of letting others write it for them." His words stayed with me as I drove home that night. Maybe he was right. Maybe the whole journey, from the first property to the Meridian to the inns to the resort, had been about authorship. About taking control of the narrative that others had tried to write for me. Derek had tried to define me as bankrupt. My parents had tried to define me as struggling. But I had defined myself differently, and that definition had become reality through consistent action. I pulled into my parking spot and sat in the car for a moment, engine off, city quiet around me. Tomorrow I would wake up and continue building. There would be new deals to evaluate, new properties to tour, new challenges to solve. The work was never done, and I was fine with that. Because the work wasn't a burden anymore. It was a choice, one I made every day, to build something meaningful in a world that constantly tried to diminish people who didn't fit convenient narratives. I got out of the car, locked it, and walked toward my building. The apartment that had once been cover now felt like home. Not because it was luxurious or impressive, but because it was mine, chosen deliberately, part of a larger strategy that had paid off beyond my expectations. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind me. The city hummed outside, indifferent and eternal, while I stood in the quiet space I had created and allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Not pride exactly, but acknowledgement. I had done what I set out to do. I had built something real. And nobody could take that away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.